Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. My name's James from the Typeform community team, and I'm here today to present a very exciting webinar called How to Write Effective Surveys. I hope you're all safe and well. Thanks a lot for joining us here. We'll be kicking off in just a couple of minutes, where we'll be joined by Ali and Singh from Bellini Slushie, which is a website where you can get help writing surveys. So they're going to be here to educate us on what goes into making successful surveys. Just a bit of housekeeping to start as people start to filter in. We're streaming today live on Hopin, where Gabby from the Typeform community team is lurking to welcome you and help you out with any information that you need. She'll be sharing links to the content that we'll be mentioning, etc. You can also use the chat feature of Hopin to just say hi, introduce yourself, hang out, be nice. And there's also a Q&A tab there, which we'll use exclusively for any questions that you want to ask to Ali and Singh. But I'll give you a bit more info on that later. We're also streaming today on Typeform's YouTube and LinkedIn channels. So if you're watching there, feel free to add your questions there, and Tommy will be there from our social media team to interact with you in the comments. If you're wondering if this will be recorded, I know a few people have been asking. Yes is the answer. We'll be posting the recording in the Typeform community, and we'll share the link with you as well afterwards via email. We'll also upload the video to Typeform's YouTube channel, so you are completely covered afterwards. Okie dokie, so with all the admin out of the way, let's get going. By means of an introduction, this is actually the first in a new series of webinars called Head Start, where we're going to be speaking to people from around the Typeform community, whether that's Typeformers, so people working at Typeform, or people who are using our product, like our guests today. So the idea is that we share insights, expertise, and experience in order to help you achieve great things with Typeform and in your business or your work in general. So for this first one, we're going to focus on survey research. Obviously, Typeform is a fantastic tool for making surveys. It's got cool features like logic jump for conversational experience, great design tools, and the ability to kind of integrate with other platforms as well. But it's only half the job. You still need to make sure your surveys are well written and that they're structured in a way that's going to get you meaningful results. So to help us get our heads around this and explain just how to do it properly, I'm really excited to introduce Ali and Singh from who are the co-founders of Bellini Slushie, which is a question platform where you can kind of get advice on how to write survey questions. I don't have any entrance music lined up, unfortunately, so I'm just going to awkwardly pop them on screen and hope it works. So welcome, Ali. Welcome, Singh. How are things going?
Good. Thank you for having us here. Thanks for everybody that's joining in. We appreciate you watching us.
Thanks to you. We're really grateful to have you here. Just for the benefit of the folks back home, whereabouts are you in the world right now?
Yeah, so I'm in Philadelphia in the United States, or actually I'm in New Jersey right now, but I'm based out of Philadelphia in the United States.
I'm in Singapore right now, so. Yeah,
a bit of a time difference.
A lot of a time difference, yeah. So thanks for making it happen. I'll let you start in a sec, just to give some context to our viewers before we start. So we connected with Ali and Singh originally because they were using Typeform to do some research to help launch Bellini Slushie. We were so impressed that we wrote a blog post telling about your story, and we'll share the link with that to that in the chat. And we wanted to get you here basically to share your wisdom and your experience in research and surveys with everyone. So we're very honored that you said yes. And I think with that, I'll hand over to you both to enlighten us all about survey creation. And when you're done, I'll pop back on, and we can have a look at any questions that come in from our viewers. So viewers, feel free to ask questions. We'll have about sort of 10 minutes at the end, I think, for questions. So we might not be able to get to everything, but we'll try. So with that, Ali and Sing, I'm going to pop up your presentation and then leave you to it. So any technical problems, you're on your own.
It's your fault if there's technical problems.
That is on me. Okay, here we go. Over to you.
All right. As this is pulling up, I'll say we do have a lot of content to get through, so we might not be able to answer questions live as we're going through it. Make sure you just send them in the chat, and we'll try to address as much as we can at the end. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking through how to write effective surveys. The way that we'll do that, we'll talk about creating survey outlines and making sure you're asking the right questions and really eliminating ones that you don't need. We'll also then talk through how to write survey questions, and one of those main topics is avoiding biases. I already saw a question come in about how not to lead your participants on, so we will be covering that in this seminar. We'll also be talking about open-ended questions, how to write effective open-ended questions, when or when not to use them, and then also just talking about making sure that you dry test your survey before sending it out so that you discover any holes or any issues. So we'll be spending the next 45 minutes talking about that. Before we get into that, let us introduce ourselves a little bit more. So we're Ali and Ziying. We actually met when we were in Singapore working together. I'm back in the United States now, but we, I guess, liked each other so much that we decided to build Bellini Slushie together. My name is Ali. I love sour beers, and I think everybody should love sour beers. The more sour the beer is, the better it is. I've been doing concept validation and development, we'll call it, for the last 5-ish years in both the United States and Singapore.
And hi, everybody. I am Zing, and I cannot stand sour beers. I don't understand why. And you might be wondering, why on earth are we talking about sour beers? But we'll get to it in a bit. I have been doing UX strategy, design, and research for like the last decade already. So it's been a while. Yeah.
And so you might be wondering why we're specifically calling out the fact that we like or don't like sour beers. The reason is when we started building Bellini Slushie in Singapore, we were doing it a lot after work, going to bars and hanging out. And we were trying to think of a name. And one day we saw Peach Bellini Slushie on the board, which was a sour beer. And we were like, that's an amazing name. That's what we're going to name our project after. So that's why we're talking about sour beers so much. We love it now because of Bellini Slushie. So Ziying does like sour beers. I will say that.
All right.
All right. So we'll get started. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to spend the next 40 minutes really talking through writing surveys, outlines, writing good questions, making sure you test it. So let's get into it. Ziying, do you want to start?
Yep. Okay, so if you've never written a survey before or a survey outline before, here's something new. But if you have, like, this should be familiar to you. The key pieces of a survey outline are goals and objectives, percentage of questions for each goal, the prioritization of the goal, and who the survey's like target audience is. So if all of this seems a bit much, don't worry about it. We'll keep talking about it all through this webinar. So moving on. Right. What do you use a survey outline for? For alignment. You need to gather alignment on the expected outcomes and insights that you're getting from this survey itself. This is really important. Like, this is a really important point. It's the whole point of building a survey outline, right? We'll get into it. Right. So I wanted this entire webinar to be a little more hands-on, a little more practical. So we have like grounded it in a particular example here. So we thought about it a lot and decided that we're just gonna pick something that's top of mind for everybody. The one thing that we all cannot do together, which is travel in the middle of a pandemic. So what we're gonna do here, it's a case study. Like, imagine you're a travel agency trying to reboot your booking business, and you're trying to find out directionally what are the next best steps to take, right? So as a like a company, you want to find out how to lock in these bookings before like, the gates open, everybody rush to like book it, and you're competing with all these other travel agencies, right? So what do? Right, we write a survey outline. So this is what a survey outline would look like. So for like, time's sake, like we've already populated some of the things here. So these are what goals could possibly look like. Some of the goals might look like, what are the general sentiment towards travel during a pandemic? What's the willingness to buy packages now in advance? Fears and worries about like travel packages and challenges of traveling during a pandemic. So these are what like goals could look like. Your goal might look very, very different because you're targeting a very different niche or a much smaller like market, or like, you just have different business objectives. So these things will change a lot, but these are just examples of how you could write them. And then the next piece here is target audience. This is super important because you need to know who you're sending your survey out to, so that you know how to write them. To write effective surveys, you need to know who you're sending them out to, right? So for this particular use case, we're going to send them out to frequent travelers. And even if you already have a customer base, it's sometimes really, really nice to actually reach out to potential leads, potential customer, repeat customers who have made inquiries within the last 12 months. That always works really well. And one tidbit here that we have, it's that if you're sitting around wondering how to fill out this bit here and you don't know and you have no idea how to, chances are that like you either need to do some other forms of research like desk research, or like just do user interviews to figure out like what sort of like questions and like target markets you're even looking at before you dive right into it. A survey is usually not the first thing you want to do in your whole like research journey, right? So moving on. How do survey outlines become good surveys, right? Like writing those few bullet points ain't gonna get you there. It's not a survey.
Really?
Well, as a rule of thumb, like that we can give you here, like simple rules, it's that every single question should map back to the goals. So we have 4 goals there. Like you want each of the questions to map back to one of the 4 goals. If you can't find a reason why, or like can't find a goal to map it back to, like chances are you need to remove it. Like it's a good idea to remove it. Surveys usually get too long. So brings me to my first point. Like you need to ruthlessly eliminate questions. Like it goes like 2 ways. You either start with like, I don't have any questions and I don't know what to write, to like the other end where you have 100 questions that you want to ask, and now it's a problem because nobody wants to like fill out a 100-page like questionnaire. It's not an exam. And never lose sight of your goals. Like this is the one thing that we'll keep hammering on throughout this entire presentation because it's so important. If you're in a small organization, maybe this doesn't happen a lot. But if you're in a large organization, like you have hundreds of stakeholders that just like, what do you think if we add this particular question in here? Okay, can you help me ask like this particular thing? It's like those things happen all the time. And you're just like, oh, maybe I should compromise a little bit here, a little bit there. And then there you go. Your survey no longer follows the outline that you have written, right? So let's put that into practice, right? Like we need to start writing the survey. We've been talking a lot about this outline thing, right? Like still not a survey, like need to submit it for work. So you sit and then you're like, where do I start? It's I don't know where to start. And then we realize that there's a big problem. Of the 4 goals, we don't know which one of these are the most important, right? Like which one does the business care about the most? Which one does your boss care about the most? Which one does the CEO care about the most? Or whoever's in charge of like the operation cares about the most, right? Like this piece here is where the alignment happens, right? You need to align on the expected outcome of the survey. Like which one of these things are the most important to the business? And then we tackle that with the highest priority within the survey. The survey needs to fulfill that 100%. So in this case, we've agreed that like, the willingness to buy is the most important piece because it's the thing that brings in the revenue. We have to figure out whether or not people are willing to buy a package now or in advance, right? Otherwise, all of it's like non sequitur, right? So I would say take time to find the alignment. to prevent like bigger problems down the road. Because once you start writing the survey, like then people start saying like, oh, maybe this question should be phrased better this way, this thing here, this option, that option. And then you get into like the details of it all, but maybe the big picture isn't even aligned in the first place. So like you have disagreements much further up the value chain than like later. And so yeah, disagree as early as possible. It's going to save you a lot of time downstream.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so you might be thinking, okay, how exactly do I write all of these questions? And this is where we'll plug Bellini Slushie. So we've actually created an open source question bank pre-populated with a bunch of traditional questions that you could either take and use them as is or adjust them as you need to. So if you have trouble thinking of survey questions right, you're not sure the right way to phrase something, check out Bellini Slushie, our question bank. It's bellinislushie.com. We'll send the link in it afterwards as well. But it's a repository that we want to continue growing with more questions as people submit it, so that researchers like yourself, like ourselves, can continue to use it and better ourselves. So I'll stop plugging there. And then I'll say, okay, so now we have to write our questions. What's the best way to go about doing this? The way we like doing it is just doing a big brain dump. So we know our 4 main goals. Let's just write everything we think is possible for answering those 4 goals. And it's a little bit about like writing, where they say, just write things down. Don't think about it. I'm guilty of this, where I'll just stare at a page and not say anything because I want it to be perfect. At the end of the day, just write everything down. You don't have to get it perfect at the first shot. Just write things down, and then you can continue iterating, removing, adding after the big brain dump. So we've done the brain dump. What happens next? Well, next we need to map back all of these different brain dumped questions to our goals. So we know that, for example, determining a willingness is the most important goal, but we only have 3 questions in here. If you look at 4, well, there's actually a bunch of questions that are mapped back to our 4th most important goal. Maybe that's a little bit unbalanced, the way that we have our prioritization and the questions that we think we're going to ask. I'll also caveat, there are additional demographics that you're going to need to ask. These most likely aren't going to map back to goals, but they will be important so that you can either target the right people or make sure that when you're analyzing the results, you can get the right the balance of responses and understand, are there differences between age responses, maybe gender, maybe household income, etc. So we've done the exercise of theoretically mapping things back to the goals. And don't worry, we're not going to read through all of this. But now we've mapped back all of our questions to our goals. What happens? So this is where we start eliminating questions. So like I mentioned before, we took the question that, or the goal that we ranked as the 4th most important, and 38 of our questions were mapping back to this. That's going to add a lot of extra time to our survey. That might have been questions that were shoehorned in by other people. And we just want to say, okay, what is a nice to have for our survey, and what is crucial to answer our questions? And so what we'll start doing is saying, okay, these questions are the lowest priority. Let's see what I can remove. At the end of the day, you want to take action on all of your insights. If you're just going to keep, like, some people do it, but nobody runs surveys for fun. You want to run surveys to actually take direction. So just remove questions that you don't need. It is as simple as that. If somebody's putting pressure on you to shoehorn something in, you don't need to include it if it's not going to help you. So this is, another way to eliminate questions. So, okay, avoid filler questions. When was the last time you traveled? This might be helpful to filter in later, but the pandemic in this case has been going on for a long time. There is a good chance that people haven't traveled in a while. So in this instance, this might actually be a filler question that we could end up removing and either combining with another question, or we might have the data somewhere else to already tell us people are traveling XYZ amount of times in the last 12 to 18 months. Another thing, so I mentioned this as well, do not shoehorn questions in. So especially when there are extra stakeholders in, as soon as they find out you're running a survey, they're going to be like, oh, can you ask this? Like, we need to know this. Ask this question because this is important for our return on investment, something like that. But at the end of the day, it's not going to help you answer any survey questions. So if it's going to just make your questions longer and it's nice to have, just remove it. And then, like we also mentioned, make your goals like as precise as possible. So any goals that's just a general sentiment or a general statement, it's going to be very easy to map things back to general statements. If your goal is very, very specific, then it's really easy to understand, okay, which questions should I be mapping back to this goal, and which might not fit in there exactly, and maybe either should be removed or combined with another one. You know, in this case, the travel company does care about demand in travel out of country, or does it care about the in-country travel? So we had two questions, right, on traveling out of country, traveling in country. Let's try and pick one of those so that we understand what the travel company cares about and ask those questions the most.
So I'll add a little point here, which is that I see that like the magic number of questions for maximum engagement is getting a lot of likes somewhere. So I would say that these are fantastic ways to keep your survey short and engaging. The more questions you entertain about like in your country, out of country, both, like do we care about staycations, non-staycations, like glamping and things like that. Like those are ways to make your surveys as dry and as boring and as repetitive as possible. So like decide on what you want to know and then launch a survey on it. Business stakeholders can get a little bit greedy sometimes. So you want to manage expectations there. All right. So let's review our survey here. We've highlighted all the like different type of goals. So as you see here, like goal number 4 is all the way up at the start of the survey. This might seem a little bit unintuitive, but it's more important how your survey flows. It needs to read like a narrative so that the person's like train of thought like follows accordingly, right? So it's okay. Like high priority questions usually come in at the back because you sort of want to build up of context and then lead them into like, okay, so here's what we're asking, right? Instead of like just dropping them a question without any context. They're not going to be able to answer it. And this is a lot about like active and passive recall and like how reflexive the questions are. So to answer that question, like this survey is ending up at about 14 to 17 questions. It is a nice length to be working with. For an average reading level, you're looking at about 15 minutes. So not too bad, not too great, like, but you know, we're there. So moving on.
All right. So we talked a lot about writing a survey outline, making sure you're picking the right questions, you know, making sure you're eliminating questions that don't make sense, but we haven't really talked about asking good questions to make sure that we can get the best results. So we're going to spend the next section talking through asking the right questions and how to phrase things in the correct way. So the most important thing, and I know there was already a question about this, is being wary of biasing your participants and do not lead them on. I think as researchers, as we have to be as subjective, is it? Objective as possible. We know that somebody somewhere wants an answer, and so we want to make them happy by giving them the best results possible. And we want to be able to say, look, we went out and surveyed XYZ people, and 90% of people agree that they're going to buy our packages for 2021. That's all great, but we need to make sure we're asking questions where are consumers actually going to go out and do that? Or did we make people think they want to go out and do that during the survey? So we want to know the truth at the end of the day, because answers that will lead us down the wrong path could actually end up costing us money, could end up costing us time, and then end up, you know, getting in trouble because somebody will say, well, you told me the survey results said XYZ, but really that's not what happened in real life. So how exactly do we not ask biased questions? How do we not lead people on? So the biggest thing for this is using uneven Likert scales. So if you know what Likert scales are, if you don't know what Likert scales are, those are the simple questions where you ask, you know, how satisfied are you on a scale of 1 to 5? And it goes from extremely unsatisfied to extremely satisfied. Those types of questions are Likert scale questions. They're probably the most common questions you'll see in surveys because they're really easy for participants to answer. However, there are issues with asking uneven Likert scales. So you'll see for this one, how likely are you to travel outside the country right now? Our options are extremely likely, very likely, somewhat likely, and unlikely. There's 3 positive options there and 1 negative option there. So even here, we're intuitively making the participant think, oh, maybe I am likely. It's on what scale of degree am I likely to do this? And maybe I'm not unlikely. So you're sort of shoehorning in and making people think, okay, let me select likely. And maybe unlikely is not an option you want to select. So another way, asking overly hypothetical statements. So if you think about this one, if you ask the question like, if the pandemic is completely over within 2022, how likely are you to purchase a travel package? That is, nobody knows what's going to happen in 2022. We all want the pandemic to be over, but realistically, is it going to happen? I don't know. The participant doesn't know. So they're going to give us a response based on a hypothetical situation. And is that going to happen? We don't know. And so at the end of the day, is that data then useful for you because they're taking a guess? You're now interpreting their results based on their guess. And so it just gets really jumbled when you ask that hypothetical statement of, do you think the pandemic is going to be over? The perfect world situations where life exists in a vacuum, that it doesn't happen. So we need to try to avoid that as much as possible in our surveys. So for the next one, including ridiculous comparisons in either your question or your responses. So we'll take this question. Which of the following are your biggest concerns when it comes to traveling right now? If you read through, a lot of the top ones are very generic statements. I'm concerned about getting lack of access to healthcare, the risk of getting infected. And then the last one is, which seat do I get on a plane? And so you compare about, getting locked out of the country, or which seat do I get on a plane? They're not really something that you can compare apples to apples. This is either a deep dive into another concern on one of these options, or it's an entirely separate question about, I don't even know, just like smaller things you're worried about. Yeah, so try to avoid the ridiculous comparisons and make sure all of your responses make sense when you compare them to each other. So another thing sort of similar to that is excluding responses in your survey. This is the same exact question, but we actually excluded the risk of getting infected option here. And that could have been unintentional. So sometimes it happens where you just don't do enough research to not include all of the right responses. Or it could be intentional where you're like, I don't want people to select that option, so I'm either going to hide it or not include it. When you don't give everybody the options, then you're not getting the correct responses from your respondents. And once again, that could lead you down the wrong path because they didn't even get the option to tell you their true feelings.
That's true.
Yep. Finally, I know I'm talking a lot. So the last one is making it hard to say no. So this happens a lot. As human beings, we obviously want people to say yes. Sometimes we want to be a little salesy because we want people to give us the questions that we want. But like we mentioned, we need to try to be as objective as possible in here. So if you start off a question like, this year has been unprecedented and extremely stressful for everybody. Traveling gives you the opportunity to relax and recharge. If I'm taking the survey, I'm going to read that and be like, you're right. It has been stressful. You're right. I do want to travel. So I'm actually going to say, maybe I am going to be more likely just because you led me on and made me think, okay, like I am stressed. So making sure we're not either leading people on the way that we frame the questions or the way that we like just even order the questions in here so that they end up having to say yes. And you sort of convince them, say yes, say yes, say yes. But were they going to say yes if you didn't convince them?
Probably not.
Yeah.
All right. Next part. So a survey is not an exam. It looks like an exam. It sounds like an exam. It tastes like a test paper, but it's not an exam. This is not a place for tricky questions. I think I mentioned this a little bit at the start. There's active recall and then there's passive recall. This is really, really important for the next part of it. What I'm going to talk about is open-ended questions. So this is a thing that like sometimes you see on surveys where it's like there are 6 open-ended questions in a row, and then you're just like, oh, I'm so tired. I don't want to do this anymore. And then you give up. People abandon surveys because there are too many open-ended questions. They don't want to fill out such a long survey. Like how tedious the survey looks is a great determination of how high your abandonment rate is. So that's what Typeform does really well. They do that slow scroll thing for you, so people don't actually scroll to the end and be like, oh, this is a really long survey, I don't want to look at it. Right. So the other thing is also you have to really, really consider your participants' reading level. Right? If it's not their first language, if English is not their first language, you can't expect them to be able to fill out open-ended questions, right? Even your options needs to be phrased simply. Don't be convoluted about it. If you're too convoluted, they're not going to understand the nuance of your question, and if they don't understand it, they can't answer it, right? And then do understand that if you pay your participants to answer your surveys, to get through your surveys of many open-ended questions, they're just gonna type, I don't know, keyboard smash and things like that. Those things happen. We've seen them even when we only have 1 or 2 open-ended questions. Right. So now you're thinking, it's there must be a good use case for open-ended questions. Yes, there is. Feedback forms. Feedback forms are complaint forms, suggestion forms are great for open-ended questions. You know why? Because they've just done the thing. I go to a yoga class and then I'm just okay, I have lots of thoughts about the instructor. I don't like that. I don't like the temperature of the room. It stinks. It's why is the mat so sticky? What is this? What is that? It's those are pretty easy to recall because they experienced it themselves. So, there's no problem around that. Fresh memory, answers come easily, right? The second exception is if you have a relationship with your participants. So these are members, your longtime member, you know them, you have a relationship with them. They're more willing to take the time to fill out a longer survey and more open-ended questions to give you feedback. But in that case, you might want to actually consider whether or not you just want to interview these people so that you can ask reflexive stuff, watch their body language, and do a lot of those things. If you have the time, you have the budget and the resource, do it. Consider that.
So I'm going to add a third exception as well. So open-ended questions are also the best when they're following up a question. So if you ask somebody, how likely are you? How satisfied are you? Then you ask, okay, why did you say you were very satisfied with them? Because then they are prompted, and this is going to be a lot of times their experience or their opinions. What we're talking about is asking open-ended questions as qualitative research when you might not know the answer sometimes. So be wary of that. And a lot of times, I don't know if you need to make sure you're combining the right, we'll talk about this later, but qualitative and quantitative research to avoid asking too many open-ended questions.
Yep. Okay, so now you must be thinking, I have so many questions I want to know. How do I actually make them close-ended as you have recommended, right? So think about it this way. It's we, at the start of it, we said we wanted to understand the fears and worries and concerns that people have around traveling during a pandemic, right? That's why we gave them these options. They just have to look at them and then be I'm pretty worried about getting stranded overseas. Lack of access to healthcare sounds, that sounds bad. Risk of getting infected, oh, that's bad. Going into lockdown, probably not. Unpredictable of the future, well, and then they rank them and then they make a decision. That's an easy decision to make, for the participants itself. But if you ask them to sit and think about it, they're oh, I don't know. Wasn't thinking about this. Not in the headspace. Not in the right mood to be thinking about traveling, maybe. So those are hard. And again, small tip here is that if you're struggling to come up with these options, you probably need to do some other form of research. Ali was mentioning that a little bit just now. It's do some user interviews, figure out what the key themes are, and then this is how you come up with the options to fill out this survey. Another plus point of keeping questions close-ended is that like you get data points. You can chart nice graphs to show like execs, like this is why we should do this. Like we should introduce this particular like feature because like, the data says so. Like, having empirical data to back you up when making like suggestions and recommendations can be very, very useful and very, very powerful. So, all right, last bit here. Find a way to get feedback on your survey really, really quickly. So this is just like a nice tip that we have. And like, it's a thing that we practice a lot because no matter how good and how experienced you are at writing surveys, it's never going to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. No survey is perfect. You have to dry run them. You have to test them with real people, and then you'll know if it works or not. So is there a fast and cheap way for you to test run your survey? Like, I encourage you to think really hard and long about this and think creatively about this, because like this gives you huge opportunities to like find loopholes, blind spots in your survey, understanding problems, this and that. And if you're in a company who is sending this out to a recruitment firm to basically bring in survey participants, it costs a lot of money. You want to make sure that every time you run it, it's the correct survey that you're running, and it's up to a certain quality bar.
The amount of times we would send a survey to be programmed, and then it would come back and we would be like, oh, there's a lot of issues with this. So we should have probably identified that beforehand so that we don't have to keep going back and forth with the vendor to say, actually, can you make this change? And I just found this one. If we had discovered those earlier, we wouldn't have had as much of that time period to fix it then later.
So I want to talk a little bit more about like the kind of problems that might happen in a survey. So as I alluded to a little bit in the start, like comprehension problem. If you are in a very complex domain, like finance or insurance, anything that's like very heavy on jargons and like things like that, just remember this one thing. If you take nothing away from this entire webinar, it's that if they don't understand the question you're asking, they can't actually give you the answer. They're just picking C, because C is always the right answer. Just remember that. And secondly, it's an important point, especially if you're working in a global company with offices all around and you're the person writing the survey for some reason. Show the survey to a person in that location's like office. So say, for example, if you're sending out to Vietnam, for example, it's like send it to the Vietnam office, let them look through the survey and see if like, there are any like just glaring like language problems, communication problems. Sometimes you phrase things in a way whereby like the locals don't understand, or maybe you've been using Google Translate all your questions. Never a good idea. Hire out a good translator, make sure it's contextualized properly, localized properly. These things are important, not just to accessibility, but like to just like my first point, comprehending your question. Cannot understand you, cannot give you the answer, right? And we've talked about this. It's a second pair of eyes are so important. It's like whether this is just your friends, your family, or like fellow researchers, the internet, all of these things are just like great resources to help you. And the last one, we get this question a lot. I don't know why, but like if you're working in a very strange, difficult, and complex niche, and you need to run a survey, it's not easy. I would admit that it's not easy. There's no simple answer to this,
especially if it's B2B.
It's anything trade related. Like for example, the survey you're sending out to is like the C-suite personnel. It's that's a bit difficult. It's not very relatable. Or like you're working with celebrities, I guess. Like that's not very relatable. I don't know.
Maybe you're doing like a cryptocurrency thing and want the like anybody that mines for crypto.
I think Reddit would be a great source for that.
But will they answer it? I don't know.
I know that's a thing. Like, yeah, I would say that like no matter how hard it is, like the internet's like a good friend unless you're like locked behind closed doors with like NDAs and things like that. But like think creatively around like how you can get around the problem, because there's always a way around the problem. It's like anonymizing the questions, like having a discussion about how to ask the question, not so much about the subject matter itself, are all like good ways to do this.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point too that if you're struggling with writing questions, if you don't know how to frame something in the perfect way to get your responses, a lot of times, like I'm guilty of it, I get stuck in my own head and I'm like, I know exactly what I need answered, but how do I write it? And the easiest way is for me to go to her or somebody else and be like, hey, this is my question. What do you think? And then she'll be like, this makes no sense. Like, phrase it this way. And then you go back and forth. So there is a lot of editing during the survey writing process. And the more that you can be collaborative with people, the better your questions are going to be, unless somebody is just trying to take control, because that does happen where they're like, I want it this way. That's a whole other issue. But getting that second pair of eyes, it'll be like, oh, like you worded the question this way. Did you think about, maybe turning it into a ranking instead of a multi-select? And then it's like, oh yeah, that will get me my answers a little bit better. So getting that second pair of eyes really helps ask and write the right questions as well. All right. So this is the final thing. We'll stop talking and then we'll move forward into the Q&A session. But one thing we also want to hammer home is that user research is one piece of the puzzle. If you think about it, if you're in a large organization, even if you're just one person, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're trying to decide, oh, should I go build my startup and leave my job? The survey at the end of the day isn't going to be your end all be all. It's just one part of what you can do to make sure you're validating either your idea, your concept, maybe it's your marketing campaign, whatever that may be. You have the opportunity to go out and talk to people. So also do qualitative research. Also go to forums, do secondary research and see what people are doing. If you have access to data in internal data analytics or secondary analytics, can you watch the hotspots on pages to see where people are clicking? Can somebody in your business unit send you the statistics of XYZ? It's all will then help you A, craft a better survey, but then B, use the survey to tell the overall story. So we just hammer this home all the time. User research is only one piece of it, and you do need to make sure you're incorporating it with the rest of all of the research that you're doing. And you'll see on the side, we created a little survey in Typeform based on this conversation.
Wow. Thank you very much, Ali and Singh. Big round of applause, everybody. That was just fascinating. And yeah, I knew you would be interesting. I just didn't know it would be quite that valuable. So thank you very much for coming in. We do have time for some questions. If you're okay to stick around, I can flash them up on screen. Let me just change the view. So the first one we have is from Clara, and it's, what kind of writing tips do you have when writing questions? Yeah. When would a question be too long or complicated? And is it better to have 2 short questions than 1 long one?
Yeah, I can take this one. It goes back to, you want the question to be as easy to answer as possible. So one thing that we see a lot is people asking 2 things in one question. So for example, if you say, how easy was it for you to find something? And then were you able to purchase it after you found it? That's 2 completely separate questions. The first part is, how easy was it for you to find that thing? The second was, how easy was it for you to purchase? But a lot of times, because people want to reduce their questions, they'll try and like shoehorn that all together. As a participant, I'm not sure, am I answering for the easy? Am I answering for the purchasing? Am I sort of combining both? So it makes it confusing for the participant. And then when you're analyzing the results, you're not sure on the back end, then, okay, which one were the participants actually comprehending this as? So I'd suggest, make it into 2 short questions and just make it as easy to answer as possible.
I think if you know that it can be split into 2 short questions, I think you know what you're doing. You're trying to combine 2 questions into one. So that's definitely not a good idea. So keep them simple. Like, make sure it's like easy enough to read, write in like plain, simple English.
Yeah.
Or what other language you're writing in. Doesn't have to be English.
Good point. Okay, we've got another question here from Raphael to do with bias. So what are the best question types for concept testing and validation without bias?
Do you want me to answer this one as well?
You can do that. Like this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So the hard part about concept testing and validation is that a lot of times you're asking theoretical questions, like how likely would you be to do X, Y, Z? So you have to be very conscious that you are making sure to capture actual behaviors, even if you want to ask that likely to understand their current motive, their current behaviors before you then get to it. So what we usually do is, like, if you ask about like how likely would you to be paying for something, we don't know how likely somebody would until they actually end up paying for it. So a lot of times in concept testing and validation, surveys are a really good starting point, and a direction it'll say, we think we can go now build a prototype or an MVP based on the directional answers. It's been a lot of talking, and from there, you can actually test it in real life. So, okay, we got the go-ahead. We think people will like this. Now, will they actually like this? Seeing anything you'd add?
Yeah, I would say that, like, for me, it's the most low rent way to do it is to obviously ask a question, right? Like any investment in like UX prototype and things like that, there are problems with it because you're adding like extra variables into the test itself. Like the usability of the prototype itself could be very confusing. The visuals could add like just noise, right? What you want to do, and has worked for me, is to construct a well-written narrative. Like put the person in the scenario. So say, for example, today you're sitting on an airplane and you're like doing X, Y, and Z. Like describe everything that they're in and put them into the thing. It's like a good novel, right? If you write a good novel, like they're gonna be in the situation to better answer it. But like I would say for all of these sort of like concept testing tests, take it with a pinch of salt. Like it's still a hypothetical situation. Whether or not they behave like that in real life can still differ up to like 20-30%.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot. We have another one. We still have time for a couple of more, I think, on accessibility. So any thoughts on accessibility, diversity, and inclusion? This has been asked by Lou. I guess this relates to in the context of running surveys, right? Any thoughts on this one?
If this is about writing questions that are, I guess, accessible and diverse. Yeah, I think it's hard. If Lou could maybe in the comments, if you're still on, clarify this a little bit more about like what exactly. Because sure, we could have thoughts, but it might not be answering your question right away.
Okay, Lou. So if you want to follow up just to confirm, that would be very appreciated. Okay, we have one from LinkedIn here, which I think is very clear. From Anna, what if you have the perfect survey but not enough target audience to take it? Easy, right?
Anna's my friend, by the way. And I did not tell her to plant this, so that's funny. No, recruiting is one of the biggest issues with surveying, and you could write the perfect survey, but if your niche is hard to find, how exactly do you end up recruiting it? And we could go and talk about recruiting for hours. A lot of times it ends up, what is your budget so that you can then go out and recruit people? And then what is your persistence to make sure people are taking this survey? So, if you're trying to get participants for free, you just have to find as many channels to go to, like, where is your audience, and go to where your audience is and just consistently post them there a bunch of times, post in a bunch of different places. For most places, unless you're using a professional recruiting firm, you're not going to be able to just send the survey out and like get 1 million responses. If you have a very, very low budget, you just have to continuously hound different groups and like be shameless. It's okay. The worst somebody can do is say no. It's not like you're like asking somebody to donate an organ. You're asking somebody to take a survey, and if they say no, they say no.
Yeah. James, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I know. Very unprofessional. Sorry, everybody. I think we've got time for a couple more, maybe.
Yeah.
And there's another one here come through. Hopin. How much additional effort and cost do you plan for multilingual projects? And that's asked by Jean or Jean. I'm not sure which.
A lot.
I can do this. It's a lot. Like I think I don't know what Lou was asking about in the diversity, accessibility, and question, but I would tell you that like to do a well localized survey, it's gonna cost you a lot. Like I think if you're planning to do like one big survey and then like launch it in like 17 countries, like it's probably not gonna be great. Unless your company is that sort of company that's been running this sort of things a lot, or it's a very basic like ENPS survey or like an NPS survey, then maybe it's gonna be cheap. But if you're like, say for example, trying to understand the car market in every single country, that's gonna cost you quite a bit, because just how they refer to things in each country is so different. Traffic rules are different. Like the relationship with the police is different. So yeah, it's quite a bit. Yeah. It's a huge effort. Lauren's way of doing it.
Yeah, and like we said, it's always best if somebody's translating it for you to then try and find a local to then actually go through those translations as well. Because a lot of times, especially if you're hiring out that professional survey vendor or somebody to translate it, they will probably translate it literally. And so you might lose either some of the context of like the local flavor in that question, or you might lose the original intent of the question because they're trying to localize it too much. So you have to make sure, okay, we want to know, I don't know, how likely are you to drive to work? And making sure that we are getting that question answered in each country is really important.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. I'll go pop this one up and see if you can answer it, because maybe it's a bit niche. How do you handle other product teams in a large company conducting their own surveys that are clearly biased without involving UX along the way? And that was Josie that asked that.
No, that happens. How do I say this like in a politically correct way? I think first of all, with surveys inside your product, like they're not a good idea. They're not a good idea, because if you're in a large enough company, every single team pops one survey in your product, and then every step of the way, I'm just like, are you satisfied with this? Nope. Like, stop showing me the survey. Stop showing me the survey. It's like surveys within your product itself, like feedback, it has to be very well orchestrated, very well coordinated. Like it generally is just like bad UX. And if the company is doing this, you might want to like raise it up to the top, and it's just like org design problem. And other product teams like doing it like outside your control. I think this is something that if your company has a UX organization, it's something to raise with that leadership team and just be like, this is harming the trust that we have with our customers. And that's the thing that like we should protect at all costs. And as a UX team, that's the thing that like we have on our side to talk about, right? Like anything that undermines that trust is a problem. Like, you're not furthering the product, like you're not furthering the vision of like the company itself. You're just harming the company by trying to achieve your KPI. That's just terrible. Like raise it with the leadership team, raise it, escalate it, make sure that like it gets dealt with from the top down. Like, and tell anybody you see to stop doing it. Like that's how you influence them. Just keep repeating the message. Don't do it.
Good message. We have just, I said that was the last question, but we've heard back from Lou. Great news.
Perfect.
My question was about sending a survey to a global team of 100,000 people. for example? How do you make sure it's inclusive as possible? I guess it's a big topic, but have you got any quick tips before we finish?
Yeah, it goes back to a lot of times when you're sending out a survey, you want to try and make things as standard as possible. And so it's like, I will ask a question with XYZ responses and hope that it encapsulates every single possible response, any type of person that's answering it. So it's a really hard thing to deal with because in reality, it's not what happens. Like we've seen very, very large multinational surveys go out, and like we mentioned, it might not make sense culturally to ask, they need separate responses, for example, or, they might, maybe in the United States, we are very inclusive about like certain questions, but how do they deal with it in other cultures? Making sure you're being sensitive about different cultural sensitivity issues as well. It is a very, very hard topic because if you're sitting in the United States, like we are different than the rest. We are different than Europe. We are different than Africa. We are different than Australia. So it's hard because we have to be conscious of those differences when we're writing our surveys to make sure we are making it as precise, as concise as possible while also being inclusive, which I don't know if that answers your question. It probably doesn't. Do you have any?
Yeah, like I would say the way to make it inclusive and diverse is by your selection criteria. Make sure that the survey reaches the minority groups, make sure that it reaches the right group of people. The makeup of the people taking the survey needs to represent what your company looks like, right? And like make it a point to like include those people that like are from diverse groups and things like that, and like so that they're represented within the survey itself. Like if it takes like doubling down on like sending out twice the volume for like the whole minority groups, like do it. That's how you be inclusive, by like going one step further. The selection is like a big part of it already. You can make the questions perfect, but if they're not aware of the survey, can't take it, can't give you a response. Like your results makeup are still going to be not great. Not great, not inclusive, not diverse.
Yeah, because they might not end up taking it, and then you're not collecting their responses, so it creates that issue as well.
Yeah, and allow for feedback. I think that's important because like sometimes we unwittingly like add options within the survey itself, whereby it's just like, why would you say that? It's like I've taken a lot of like surveys where I'm just like, I don't even know what to select because they didn't give me a way to select my country, but they gave me a way to select my region. But to which I'm just like, I don't know what region I belong to. Like it's not on the list. Like Singapore's dot on the map. It's like, I don't know where it is. Like that's not helpful. It's like so things like that. It's like allow for feedback so that they can feedback to you. What are the shortcomings of the survey? So you correct it for the next time around. So I suspect like you're probably doing some sort of like ENPS and things like that. So
perfect, good answer. Okie dokie. Well, that's all we've got time for question-wise. I'm afraid, everybody. But what we will do is, if there are kind of like any loose ends that need tying up, we can answer the questions either in some follow-up content, or we can put it into the community post that we're going to share with the recording and kind of answer any loose ends there. So with that, I'm going to just wrap things up with some next steps. So just let me go back to the presentation, which is here. Important things after this. So obviously, take away everything that you've just learned. Visit Bellini Slushie. We will be sharing this presentation afterwards in the community link. So you have the links there. But essentially, this is Bellini Slushie, a great place to go to get kind of information about the right way to ask questions. So go check out the question bank there, play around with it. It's fantastic. So great job, guys, on that, because I think this is a really valuable resource for anyone who's creating surveys with Typeform. I think it's really, really super great. The next thing, oh no, again, unprofessionalism. Fill out the webinar feedback form. So in Hopin, there's a tab that says give feedback. Please let us know what you thought of this webinar and what you'd like to see in future. You know, I mean, we're planning to do more of these. So yeah, let us know what kind of content you want. And Ali and Singh, maybe you can review the survey and take part. It's probably breaking a lot of those.
You don't have anybody in Typeform that does that?
No, we do. I'm joking. Check out the Typeform community. So important. Yeah, I mentioned earlier about the webinar recording. So we have a post in our community. If you haven't been to the Typeform community yet and you're a Typeform user, even if you're not a Typeform user, it's amazing. It's a resource where you can interact with people like yourself, people that are using Typeform, experts, people from within Typeform, and kind of ask questions, contribute, share what you're doing. It's great, and we kind of welcome you with open arms there. So anyway, there's a post here, and we'll share the link in the chats now, where, well, it was basically me kind of teasing the webinar, but I'll change that and we'll add the video there and the link to the slides and everything else there. There's a funny cartoon there. Well, funny. Yeah,
not
so,
BB.
Sorry?
It's not BB.
No, there's no BB in there. And then finally, come to our next event. So we have an event coming up next week. If you're interested in growing your business, we have a webinar which we're presenting in conjunction with Salesforce Essentials, where we're going to be talking to the VP of Sales and Biz Dev at First Base. So come check that out. That's going to be really interesting too. And also we'll be offering exclusive discounts to Typeform and Salesforce Essentials. That's something to get excited about. So yeah, anyway, check out the events page and you'll see all the details there. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up. I've just realized we're 4 minutes over and I'm gabbling away. So once again, thank you, and thank you, Ali and Singh, for joining and for giving up your time. You've put in a lot of work into this presentation, and it shows. I mean, it's fantastic, and I can see people all over social media are loving it and hop into. So
we're bad at social media. Don't tell us that.
Yeah, so if anyone's trying to add you to social media, then be prepared to just be ignored, I guess.
Yeah. You might get a response 2 weeks later, like, oh, yeah. Sorry, just saw this.
And a big thanks as well to the folks behind the scenes at Typeform, to Gabby and Tommy, for kind of keeping everyone engaged on the chat. So thanks to them, and more importantly, thanks to everyone at home or in their offices, wherever they are, for joining. We appreciate your time. We know you're busy people, and we hope that you've learned a lot. I'm pretty confident that you have. So yeah, with that, without further ado, let's bid adieu. And I guess we wave or something.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.